Randomness of Nothing, Tron podcast listeners. This is your host again, Rashad Woods. And as always promised, I said that I would bring interesting guests from all walks of life. And this man epitomizes it with his creativity in writing, directing, music, as well as academics as well, too. And he's a self-taught musician. He's deeply in the arts and he's an acclaimed filmmaker as well, too. Cevin Soling, thank you so much for your time, sir.
I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Man, this is fun, because when I got a chance, when I first get the email and I see people's, background and their accolades, and, I picture myself like, hey, he's an author, and then he has these books, and then all of a sudden I start visualizing what you do. And then my mind just starts racing when I think of all the accomplishments, and I see some of your book covers as well, too. So for the purpose of these audience in the show, can you give us a little background about yourself?
So, yeah, I engage in many different projects. I guess I guess I had a calling for the arts, but it wasn't something that I pursued from my original background, which was, the school I went to was very heavily academically oriented. Anyone who did the arts did so because they were a failure. They couldn't pass the academics. It was very established that way. It was horrible.
More than anything else.
Yeah, no, it was really pretty oppressive that way. And but I couldn't wait to be done with school. But I went off to college, and then I just wanted to I just couldn't wait to strike it on my own.
Yeah.
And I had an idea for a film project, for a documentary, and it was I'm a big fan of the Beatles. I had seen this unusual interview with Paul McCartney where he was talking about how he's having dinner with John Lennon, and John Lennon suggested that two of them get holes drilled in their heads.
Oh, wow.
And it was, yeah, exactly. It was one of those things where it's like, well, this had never come up before in any interview, and this is it was so shocking and so strange.
Yeah.
And apparently, I was like, well, I kind of have to look into this a bit more. But McCartney said that Lennon said that it gets, it changes your consciousness and you're high all the time, and that they should get it done. And I was like, I'll tell you what, John, you get it done, and if it's really good, we'll talk about it. And I was like, just knowing I was doing that.
Yeah.
And I was like, where did Lennon hear this from? Like, what was the story behind this song?
Right.
So yeah, I later found out that there was a book that a journalist friend of mine, Donna Costi, had written called Coops, and it was like all these crazy people with crazy ideas. But then there was this one, few pages. Everything was just a few pages long. Was about this guy this doctor had come up with this theory about drilling a hole in your head would result in a perpetual state of increased brain blood volume. And by having more brain blood volume, there'd be more oxygen and glucose to the brain and greater brain metabolism. And the way to achieve this was to decrease the amount of cerebrospinal fluid in your head surrounding your brain. And you do that by drilling a hole in your head so that it alters the levels of cerebrospinal fluid. So anyway, so Costi's like, this guy, this is a nutty idea, but she said it sounds, like this could actually work, and it was the only thing. And I'm not really interested in crazy people, but what I was interested in,
it's fascinating.
Because she suggested it could work. So I was like, I'm going to dig a little deeper into this. So I ended up I tracked down the doctor who came up with this idea, who drilled a hole in his own head. And it resulted in this following where dozens and dozens of people in the United States. He was from Amsterdam.
Okay.
And all these British nobility, lords and ladies read about this, and they started drilling holes in their heads. And it's like, why has this never been documented? Why is it no one knows about this?
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So I made this film about that, and I had no background in film. I'd never studied film.
That's the fun part about not having backgrounds and stuff, because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Well, I learned pretty fast how much I didn't know.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And the film ended up on winning awards and on television, and it was sort of a cult classic because there's no shortage of gore in it. Which I'm not really into gore, but this was necessary for the story and stuff like that. And there's certainly people who feel. Yeah.
It's funny.
So like one of the people who drilled the hole was a woman named Amanda Feilding, and she used to and the people, it's illegal to drill a hole in someone, like practicing surgery without a license, and then even doctors aren't allowed to do it because it's believed there's so she used a dentist drill, which took hours and hours, but she made a film of her own self trepanation, and yeah, and it's this incredible art film, and it ended up being shown just once at the London ICA, and Bertolucci was in the audience, and
Well, that's amazing.
patrons, at the screening of falling off their chairs like overripe plums, because they were passing out from just the copious amounts of blood. And Bertolucci said it was the greatest movie ever made, and he wasn't saying, and he was serious.
Yes,
Even if it was an art film. And
correct.
it was more than just her drilling. It was like a little bit of her background, and she narrates it, and she's got this pigeon that imprinted itself on her that flies off and comes back in command. And then when she does the drilling, she cuts her hair and then puts on these goggles so that all the blood that's coming down doesn't get into her eyes, and she can see what she's doing. And she's wearing this white gown, and it's completely, just puddle of blood, and it's it's insane, but otherworldly. But it was crazy. Anyway, so the people were amazing who drilled holes. They were all very nice, and
That's awesome.
that was launching my film career. So that was how I got into film. But I also had a passion for music. In fact, because I do. I guess I do both professionally, but it's I'm more known for film, and but my knowledge of music, at least rock music between 1960 and 1990, is pretty much encyclopedic.
That's awesome.
So my knowledge of film is no better than is probably worse than most people. As far as like great films, the great directors and stuff like that, and people expect me to know all sorts.
You're in the medium of film to be able,
yeah. So I've done a bunch of documentaries and animation, and working on feature stuff as well, and that's a lot of what I do. But at some point I decided to go back to school and picked up a whole bunch of degrees, even though so I hated school for a long time. But then going back, I'm going back on my own terms, and I didn't have to be there. So that changed everything too. Then
wonderful.
How because it didn't matter if they kicked me out, basically, because I speak my mind, and there was a lot of the sensitivities of many people made them afraid to just say whatever they thought about engaging with whatever material that we were working on, and I had no fear because. But you kicked me out. It's not going to change anything.
No, you are who you are. And there's a certain beauty of being self-aware about that too, and not being insecure. And just briefly, when you were talking about the drilling and the holes in the head, I was thinking of the movie Pi. That was Darren Aronofsky's first film, and I haven't seen that movie in a long, long time. And then all of a sudden, I remember when Requiem for a Dream came out, and they're like, he made a movie before that, right? Because Requiem was his big breakthrough film. And then all of a sudden, you saw Pi, and the guy has the, the math, it was about the mathematical equation that, with his head. Again, I haven't seen the movie in like 20 years. But I was thinking wasn't he trying to get, some sort of device off the side of his head or something like that the entire time?
I actually seen the movie Pi. I'm aware of it, and I was actually at Sundance when it debuted there.
That's dope.
Yeah, because I did a couple of films. And one of them was, if you tie into the Rumpleville stuff, one of them was, so there was one I was an executive producer, and then another one was an animated short. It was called Boris the Dog, and
okay.
And that was I'd written a whole bunch of short stories and decided to get them illustrated. It took forever to find illustrators, because this is when it was before the age of the different online access to freelancers and stuff.
Absolutely.
And so the networking and finding things like that was much more challenging. There was a close friend of mine who was a fairly well-known band, Dead Meadow, and he did the artwork for a bunch of them, and that was pretty great. But this was before I knew him, that I did Boris the Dog, and Boris the Dog ended up on MTV, and which and premiered out at Slamdance, Sundance, and
amazing.
and it was on, Cartoon Sushi was the show it was on, and that so it started as a short story, and I've animated a few of the Rumpleville stories. But Boris the Dog was almost became the replacement for Beavis and Butthead on
Are you serious?
MTV. Yeah, so Beavis and Butthead ran its course, and then they also had some legal issues with there was a case of arson, and that was fired by Beavis. So they were like, okay, we got to move on, and we need, what's going to replace it. And I met with, all the heads at MTV, and they were all excited about it. And then some decision was made outside the animation department. Now we're going to go reality TV instead of animation.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding.
Yeah, so that was a bummer. That was.
Yeah, man, that's and obviously, I mean, you look back and you're like, well, I'm a child of that era, and so we'll get to your book career, but it's crazy because you look at some of the cartoons back then, whether it was Beavis and Butthead, whether it was Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life, and you're like, wow, these shows were actually more edgier than you don't like. You're watching them and you're laughing, but you're like, damn, they got away with a lot while making these shows, and you didn't even know at the time what they were actually getting away with.
That was extremely edgy.
Yeah.
It was not. And,
yeah, they pushed the limits.
Yeah, I just submit a bunch of so the screenplays for a bunch of the episodes. I did write 4 and
yeah,
for 4 episodes, and but
yeah, that's amazing. Let's talk about your books, because you're obviously, you're a prolific author as well too. It's you have the Rumpleville Chronicles, and then you have what's the Jolly Elf, the Disciples of Trotsky, which seems really fascinating to me. And then the Tiffany, Britney, Brooke. Can we break down, those titles, please?
There's Rumpleville books. There's also those are all part of the Rumpleville series. The Rumpleville series has 9 different books, and they present themselves as if they're children's books, and but they're not necessarily books that. I mean, if you have a child that's a bit warped in their sensibilities,
the Tim Burton type kid, yeah.
Yeah, there's some things that'll be over their head. I mean, for me, so when I was little, I loved listening to Tom Lehrer. I found my parents' record collection, and there was this guy Tom Lehrer. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
not familiar, no. But I'm going to Google him after the show.
He's musical comedy, but he was, and he was doing his stuff in the very late 50s, early 60s, and his stuff was even dark by today's standards. Yeah. And I, as a little kid, I understood the irreverence, but I didn't, understand a lot of the, the references.
Correct.
But his stuff was brilliant, and it's really, I mean, and it stood the test of time. And he just passed away a month or 2 ago.
Okay.
But one of the reviews of his work, I think from the New York Times, was Mr. Lehrer's fuse is not fettered by such inhibiting factors as taste.
Oh, jeez.
Which is just a great way of saying, that
trash.
Well, yeah, just that, that his work is, poor taste. It's absolutely hilarious and brilliant stuff that, no sacred cows.
Those are the best.
So, but as I got older, I could listen to it again. Keep listening to it. I mean, listen to it to just being scathing and brilliant in the lyrics. The music is engaging and jaunty and everything. And
absolutely.
But but it certainly was an inspiration. Another was James Thurber. I'm not familiar with James Thurber.
No, you're taking me down my wormhole that I need to go down. No,
that's all right. One of his things. So he wrote in, I think, the 1930s and 40s and 50s. But his big thing was gaslighting. He'd write these stories, about, usually a henpecked husband gaslighting his acerbic wife. He'd have, stories of that kind of nature.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Where there'd be sort of a polite, refined malice. That it presents itself as one thing, but it's very caustic and biting. And so so I'm certainly inspired by those. So the books are have some kind of twist, but they generally deal with the foibles of human nature is what they're about. They're sort of like postmodern Aesop fables or something like that. So Tiffany, Britney, Brooke.
Those are fun.
which is definitely one of my favorites of the month. It's the story of this young woman, uh, who leaves home, from small town so that she can go to Hollywood so she can follow her dreams of becoming a prostitute. But she ends up getting sucked into the sleazy world of acting, and becomes, an actress, and she has to, hide it from her parents because, they think that she's walking the streets, and instead she's working, in film and everything. And then, of course, they find out eventually because she just, becomes too successful, and
Oh my goodness.
she's just humiliated that, that she's allowed herself. But it parallels. The parallel is, it's so disturbing in terms of how similar, acting is, to prostituting oneself. But so it plays really, really nicely. And you know I have a lot of, because I work in film, I have a lot of friends who are actors, and they're both, um they'd be more insulted by it if they weren't sympathetic to a lot of it, and if it weren't,
Right.
crafted as nicely as it is.
You know what's funny is just briefly, I was thinking of, when you mentioned that particular, medium and that particular plot, I keep thinking of Mulholland Drive from the late great David Lynch, right? And I remember when I watched that back in like 2003 or two ish when it first came out, when I was on campus at Michigan State when I graduated. They used to have like a film night on like Friday nights where you could watch it at one of like the halls for like $5. And I remember watching this movie, and it was, for anybody who's ever watched a David Lynch movie, throw plot out the window because it's not happening, right? But the way that movie was structured, you couldn't take your eyes off of it, right? It was Naomi Watts' breakout role, and it was like that Norrish, went to Hollywood, and for people who haven't seen it, you have to appreciate it to watch it. But I was thinking of Mulholland Drive when you mentioned it. It's an all-time classic too.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a different kind. I mean, mine's, isn't as, I try to keep it lighter than David Lynch does.
Yeah.
David Lynch does.
Yeah.
The reads are fun, as opposed to going into some dark place where you feel sort of psychologically tormented and on edge, which Lynch does masterfully. These are meant to be,
Absolutely.
fun, entertaining reads. But yeah, and another one that does, like The Bomb That Followed Me Home is another one of those type stories where, it reads like, the typical, story of the kid going home from school. He's followed by a dog and begs his parents, oh, can we keep the dog and stuff, and that kind of story. So in this case, instead of a dog, it's a bomb, and
Yeah, I saw the pictures of that.
yeah, and then, and he's trying to convince, the mother, oh, can we, his mother, it's a big responsibility. Who's going to polish it? Who's going to stand guard over it every night? I don't want to be the one who has to change his fuse every day. Like some ownership is probably wondering where his bomb is. So it's and then the challenges of caring for a bomb and yeah,
do filmmakers get more pushback when stuff is skewered from a kid's perspective? Because sometimes people think, and it's not really true, that animation is supposed to be for children or it's supposed to be PG friendly, because sometimes we have in this mode that it's a cartoon, so it's supposed to be certain for a certain demographic and age. Did you get any pushback when you said, oh, I'm going to take this a little darker and deeper?
I think, I mean, I do get it different. I think animation is long past, the realm where it was exclusively for kids. I mean, the Flintstones was prime time television, so they were, I think, were the very first to, if we're getting to his history, were the very first to challenge that animation should just be for kids.
Right.
And then Ralph Bakshi had, X-rated Fritz the Cat in the was it 72, I think. So there'd been that, but mine is different in that it's books, and people look at the books, and the books look like they're kids' books, and everyone assumes. I mean, not that there aren't graphic novels which use artwork, but mine
for sure.
really explicitly looks like, like kids' books, and that throws people in that they just assume they're kids' books, and and so yeah, one of the critics. I mean, they've gotten great critical, claim. The Bomb in particular was one where there was one one critical comment that stood out that I thought was hilarious, and that is that I mentioned, because when I was in fourth grade, we had to write. We were all the different people in the class were all assigned a project to write about different environments on the earth. Someone had to do the tundra. I had to find the coniferous forest. So as a little personal joke, I mentioned how the kid is, on the way home passes through coniferous trees, and this one critic said, "There's no way, a kid is going to know what coniferous is." I was like, that's like I took that from my fourth grade. It's always the things they point out that actually have a source. I meant to see, a history of that sort of. But no, but there are a bunch of critics that review the books and assume that it's for kids. It's like, no, this is. I mean, yes, kids can read them, but no, they're definitely not for
right. You know what I mean? And that's because it would that's
I mean,
awesome.
on the whole, the response has been pretty great, except for the people who just can't get past the fact that you can have a book that looks like that's that's for a broader audience.
Correct.
So in film though, I think they've gotten past. I mean, certainly the Simpsons broke ground there, and then and you have South Park and Family Guy and stuff that are that
and
are
Miyazaki as well too. A lot of his great works like House, Flying Castle and Spirited Away and things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Those are fantastic movies.
That's going at it in a different direction. That's just artsy and going not going the crude route. That's going higher aspiration toward so certainly that as well. But yeah, no, there's definite there's a lot of commentary, social commentary in the books, but it's not weighted down by it, and it's always done in a way that that's part of the humor.
Beautiful.
It's making fun of ourselves, and
sometimes that's the best way to get the absurdity of being human across, right? By actually putting it in an animated format, because then it'd be like because then you could actually laugh at the absurdity of humanity, because it's drawn, it's animated, and it's a character, and it seems fictitious, but it's actually telling you, in a manner where people don't feel judged, because it's not a real person depicted on in a whether it's a documentary, a film, etc. When you put it in an animated format, you're like, it seems absurd, but people who get it are like, yeah, that's really how people really are, in a way, if you put your mind in that proper state.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I like Aesop Fables. I'd mentioned them a little before. It's the same thing. You just create animal characters, and they're
Exactly. Like Animal Farm, right? Is the perfect example, right?
Well, that's a whole other stuff.
Right. Yeah. So your film, your first your first film was the War on Kids, and it says how schools are modeled after prisons, which I got a chance to see, a little bit of information about. I have not seen that documentary, but I was reading some notes from it. I saw your interview as well with Stephen Colbert. So congratulations for all the accolades you made for that film. But I'd like to get you just your opinion on that, on how you made that film.
Sure. So the first film was the Hole in the Head film. And then I made a few movies before I got to War on Kids, but War on Kids was sort of the film that I felt I was destined to make, that I wanted to make. It was the first theatrically released documentary on education, and it broke the floodgates. There was a whole bunch of movies that were made on schools after that. But I was ahead of the curve on that. But where it came from was, I went to public school, and I just found, and the public school I went to was considered to be one of the best in the country. Despite that, I felt that this was one of the most degrading, humiliating experiences that a person could have. It was awful. And a lot of my classmates just sort of accepted, well, this is just how it is, and they couldn't kind of get their head around that. No, this is not how you treat human beings. You do not, this level of degradation, and so I really wanted to take this on, and I really, as much as for all the problems that I had with compulsory schooling, I became radicalized in the process of making the film, and really understood, how it was so much worse than I even appreciated. I mean, so there's basically three primary lessons that are instilled the moment a child enters school. One is you must take orders in a docile manner. That is the number one lesson.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
The reason for that is you can't assume that this isn't the case. It has to be the case because the whole concept of how a school, a public school anyway, functions is they have to process a mass, a certain number of people. They have to process a lot of people,
Yeah.
and the only way a classroom can theoretically function, and the functioning part I count too, but the only way a class is if the 25 or so students, plus or minus, who are in the classroom sit down, shut up, eyes forward, are quiet and controlled, and are taking orders in a docile manner. That is, the classroom cannot operate unless you abandon, which is the second lesson, you can't pursue your interests. You have to abandon your interests. If you want to talk to your friend, you can't do that. If you want to read something you're interested in, you can't do that. If you want to, draw or write something that you heard about or thought about, that you can't do that. You have to sit down, shut up, take orders, whatever the teacher demands. Just sort of accept that, but it's just like the consequences to these kind of things. And people say, "Oh, it's for their own good. They have to learn the lesson." It's like, yeah, but what do you lose? What's the trade-off? And the trade-off is your relationship to authority and authority figures, and your relationship to yourself, and what you put aside in terms of what you squash in terms of internally, uh,
Yeah.
your relationship to others. Like again, you just accept. Well, I can't have healthy interactions with my friends because I have I'm in this
I never thought
construct.
about that. I never
Uh,
thought about that. That
so
makes
so the whole the criticism of school. So when people hear like, oh, there's a problem with compulsory schooling, it's like, well, the thing that people jump in is, well, who's to blame? Do we blame the teachers? Do we blame the administrators? Do we blame the students? Do we blame the parents? So those are the four people. It's like,
yeah.
oh, the administrators aren't doing, and they're so easy to ridicule and dissect it. It's like, no, I mean, none of them are responsible. I mean, they're all responsible to a certain degree, but it's the construct itself. It's the way schools, it's the school that's the problem, and the whole history of schooling is the history of failure, and it's the history of reform. Schools, we all know, oh, schools aren't working. You look at the literacy rate that, from school. Actually, before compulsory schooling was instituted in 1852 in Massachusetts. That was the first place where compulsory schooling was brought in. So you had,
Okay.
so from the birth of the nation to 1852, you had schools, but it wasn't compulsory. The literacy rate in Massachusetts was 98%.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
98%. I've heard people sound, oh, that was done by census and it was self-reporting. I was like, yeah, okay, well, here's the thing. Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine at the time of the Revolution, was the biggest selling document, and today it's not read until college because the language and everything is too sophisticated. This was, it was estimated, I think, 2/3 of the American citizens had a copy of Common Sense, and
Yeah.
presumably they were able to understand it. And these were people who weren't
For
didn't
sure.
have
Right. Right.
the
Yeah.
benefit of compulsory schooling, and somehow they were able to understand a document that isn't read today until some college course, if at all now, because we sort of have an assault on our own history. But the the schooling has made us dumber. It's lowered our expectations, and it's not effective, and there's all sorts of other consequences to schooling. It affects our empathy, our capacity to how we relate to one another and there's studies. Straub has done studies showing the diminished empathy as the longer a person is in school, that their empathy rate diminishes, creates neurosis and psychosis. Um, the pressures of school and the environment, especially now where kids are under surveillance at all times, demands conformity. Um, so it's a really terrible place, and And so my documentary shows that, and it unfortunately, just as it was peaking, this movie Waiting for Superman came out, which
Yeah.
had Guggenheim money. It was an ad campaign for charter schools. My school didn't have a product, it was just telling you to open your eyes about the problems of schooling, and theirs was no, charter school is the answer. And charter school is not the answer. It gets the same. It is public school, and it gets the same results as public school. But there was a lot of money at the time. At that time, they thought that charter schools was going to be a great business model. Excuse me. So it was an ad campaign, but with that kind of money behind it, it became the prevailing message.
I think what's the fascinating part is that some things are so deeply entrenched that it'd be tough to even attempt to unwind something like your film's ahead of the curve. But seeing as how I graduated from college, graduated from high school, I look back and I sit back and say, did you? And I agree, this isn't a knock on it, but it's a great perspective that you brought, right? Like, did you ever formulate your own independent thoughts while you were there? Or did you just do what you were told? Was there a certain level of, I'm going to pursue this irrespective of the topic that I'm being taught, right? So, maybe you're not, it's almost like you're geared towards certain things, even if that's not your specialty, your level of care. And to your point, you're putting people all in the same environment, irrespective or you want to play, you may be good at math, but why am I sitting in social studies, right? When all I really want to do is focus on mathematics and physics and things like that. And that's my passion. That's my choice. I've always been, a fan of, there should be more specialty early on. If you want to pursue, like almost if you graduate with like a science diploma or like, or like an econ diploma from high school, and you don't have to necessarily stay in these other courses for the duration of your entire schooling.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything wrong with hierarchical structure either, but it needs to be engaged with voluntarily and done so, where there's an exchange. For instance, I think, there are many different models for learning. I think one is the library model. Is a wonderful model where you go to the library, you have an interest in the librarian says, oh, you're interested in cars, to a boy perhaps. Are you interested in racing cars? You're interested in building cars? Right. Oh, I'm interested, whereas at school, it would be just one, you're going to learn, this,
yes.
And, if you want to do music, you're going to learn, this
correct.
piece by Bach or whatever. It's like, well, I don't want to do Bach. In fact, I want to do improv jazz. No, because we can't grade you on that. We have to grade you on,
right.
But the library model, you get to choose the librarian as a mentor. But another model, which is much more rigid, which I think is a brilliant model, which drives to self-mastery on a whole other level, is martial arts. The sensei is it's a very rigid hierarchy there. When as you learn, you're not just encouraged, you're required to help train.
Yes.
If you're not the sensei, it doesn't matter. You still have a responsibility to other people, in your dojo, to train them to get them better, and you're inspired to get them better.
That's a good analogy. It's good.
And it's very couldn't be more rigid, but
it's collaborative too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And here's the thing, this is a guy who, full disclosure, I have a black belt in Tong Sudo, a brown belt in Taekwondo, and I take Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. You're not even really asked, if you have that black belt to assist, that's your responsibility to. If you're a black belt in any martial art and you're at the course, at class, there's an expectation that you are to assist. And it's implied that you're going to help. A white belt is going to walk up to you by default and start asking you questions on how to do techniques and certain things. And it's not something, and that's a really, really, really good point.
Even if you're not a black belt, even if you're a brown belt and you're working with a green belt, you're like,
yes.
You're going to, and you get better at what you're doing by teaching.
Sure do.
And in fact, so when we had the one-room schoolhouses, which, prior to compulsory schooling, which was still, the teacher wasn't looking out after, when the older students were helping and engaging with the younger. And one of the best ways to learn this by teaching, because you get to better understand what you don't know. You get to coalesce what you do know and you get to explain it better, and you learn, oh, I thought I knew that. I really know it, but I'm not explaining it well. And you become aware of your deficiencies through trying to explain things, and you also hone your skills by teaching.
You sure do.
So there's an empowerment, and it creates a camaraderie as well. You end up caring more for others in helping train them. It's a bonding experience to to help learn from another and to allow them to teach you, even someone who's I did some karate for a while. I remember there was one time I was sparring, and this guy, I'll never forget this move. We're sparring, and he does this whip, like and he right in my face, and he didn't do it hard enough to break my nose, but it was just like, I was like, whoa, I never saw that coming, and it was this radical change to me. It was like, because you assume that people are going to punch you.
Correct.
And the force of a, like, and he was he was a lower rank, and it was like, wow,
And you get stopped. Yeah, and you get stopped in your tracks. You're like, hold on, do that again. Show me what you just did.
I don't want to do it again because you would have broken my nose.
Yeah. Show me. Can you perform? Can you show? Not, I don't mean hit me, right? But let's go back and see what that was, right? So yeah, that's, and you know what the other part about it is too, and just to kind of pinpoint off of that a little bit or extend from that, if you know that you're coming in with the idea that you're going to help and assist and teach, you're going to come in more prepared than you would if you were just a student, right? So you're going to be pre-planning the next day. Okay, I have to come in. If I'm coming into my martial arts training, tomorrow night, I'm like, there's a high likelihood I'm going to have to teach or assist based on my belt ranking. So I'm going to have some things that I'm prepared for or things that I was rusty on. I'm going to bring myself up to speed to make sure that if somebody asks me questions, I can rattle it off really quickly.
You have the humility to be able to accept that I might learn something too.
Oh yeah.
And that's and I might learn something from someone who isn't on my level.
Absolutely.
That's the important thing too, is because right now that the structure is in schooling is no, the teachers are going they're the fountain of knowledge. They're the source of information. They're the ones reading and judging you. Judge, jury, and executioner.
That's a really good analogy, man. I never thought of it from that perspective. I have to ask somebody who's so deep into the arts, and how does the creative process work with something? How do you actually put pen to paper, to canvas, to thought? Like, where does that start for somebody in your field?
Yes. So I mean, it is a good question. I am. My time is pursued with creative pursuits in all sorts of different fields, not just in stories I come up with in art and in basically anything. And I think it's about not censoring yourself and not restricting yourself and just being open to whatever comes in, and even if it's a bad idea. But if it's a bad idea, you don't have to share it.
But that's still subjective, right? Right. You still shoot your shot. Right. You can make like Ishtar, right? And then that's the bad idea of all bad ideas.
Yeah, but I think it's just about being open and being open to absurdity and not and not restricting oneself and not thinking, oh, I can't. That's outside the boundaries of what of where one should think. I mean, my first impulse to everything is always is always to look at the complete opposite. And so there was a story. I don't know if it was apocryphal or not, if it's a true story, but there was I had a teacher in fifth grade who was one of the first of this female pilot. And
that's amazing.
And she told stories of learning aviation, and she told this one story about the first days when the planes were finally able to break the sound barrier, and she claimed that that the joystick, which is what you put to control the elevator on the plane, whether it goes up or down, that people were trying to pull up, that the plane was going, planes kept going down. And I don't know if this is a true story, but it worked for me at the time anyway. And so someone, so after people were parachuting out and stuff like that, but the plane, the plane kept getting wrecked. And someone decided, well, what happens if I put, down? And apparently it had, that was, at a certain speed, it ended up having, the opposite effect. Again, I don't know if that story's true or not, but she told the story, and always, and it's, from fifth grade on, it's like, well, let me look at the opposite of, something that isn't what one would expect, and more often than not, the counterintuitive approach is sometimes appropriate or and works out. So I always look at, well, what would the complete opposite wrong, counterintuitive approach be to something, and that's one approach to my creative,
Yeah, I was listening to an interview from about Ice-T, and he said when he first heard Eminem, and he was like, it's very hard to get my attention to listen to music. Obviously Eminem's been around for a long time, and he said he was given like the tape by a close friend or something like that, and he's like, all of a sudden I'm hearing this guy rap about putting his girlfriend in the trunk. He was like, he never, like, what I'm saying, like, remember the first time you heard this guy, because he was like, but to parody it, he said, to paraphrase, he said immediately he just turned his head like, what is this? And then he was like, for people who want to be creative, look at what everybody else is doing and do the exact opposite of it. Right. Yeah. And he was like, that's why he stood out. He was like, nobody was talking about that.
Yeah. That's it. It's only one way.
Yeah.
I also try to use things that don't belong together. That's the other approach is finding, so there was an album I put together where I like got a whole bunch of well-known musicians to record the least likely song that you'd expect them to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was fun. Yeah, so I got like Don Ho to do Stop the Monkey, this Hawaiian singer. He was supposed to do Firestarter, but he right before I went out to Hawaii to produce it, he was like, Kevin, I can't sing I'm the bitch who hated filth infatuated. So we pick a different song. And I was like, because I had to lay down the music, and I got Jackie Chan and Ani DeFranco to do a duet.
That is sensational, man.
Forgettable. I got Devo to do Crosby, Stills, and Nash.
That's amazing.
So that's another type of creative approach. Is just what happens when you try to mix things that don't belong together, and it's pretty awesome.
That's there's something to behold, that you get a chance to just do these fascinating things every single day, and for a living. That's the reason why this show was created, was because without this show I would never have the chance to talk to somebody like you and dive my curiosity into somebody that makes films, writes books, some of which I need to start diving into, because that's right up my weird mind. I always think of like the Tim Burtons of the world, the Guillermo del Toros of the world, that you were like, how did you think of Pan's Labyrinth? Like how could you, how does the average person even think of something during the time of Francis Franco? For anybody who knows history, he was a horrible dictator of Spain, right? But long story short, the way it interwoven this, this Alice in Wonderland type tale into this, all one of the most beautiful pictures you've ever seen.
Yeah, it's a wonderful movie.
It's a beautiful movie, and so I'm in shock and awe that you have the ability to just make these things and just see where your mind takes you, and that's a trait and a gift that I'm glad you're sharing with the world.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, I'm very lucky that I get to pursue these things that and that they've been well received.
That's fantastic. Is there any obviously notwithstanding of this show, people don't need me to know how to find you, but for the purpose of the Randomness of Nothing podcast, where can people find Cevin Soling?
Best place to go is kevinsoling.com. So Kevin's with a C. I think that should be on the screen there. But yeah, to go to kevinsoling.com, there's all sorts of stuff. I do photography as well. That's on the site. I have some cartoons.
Yeah.
There's music from my band, film clips, the books, philosophy. I'm working on a philosophy book right now. And So yeah, so there's a whole gamut of stuff, and I try to present it in a easy to navigate. It's a very simple looking site, but there's a lot
I
of
saw,
a lot of
yeah,
stuff
I've been on
there.
there. The tabs are very easy to kind of dive into a bit. It shows some of your previous media appearances, it shows your artwork and photography, and I was like, man, this is really good, stuff for me, to navigate easily. And it was really fascinating. You had a picture of your cat on there. That was really cool, right? So I thought that was really dumb. I thought that was really fun.
It's kind of cat.
Yeah,
Love my
but I can't thank you enough for your time. I would love to do a part two because I think we can dive into some very interesting other facts of your background as well too. Because I think we've only scratched the surface of how interesting you are.
thank you. Thank you to say. Yeah, no, there's a lot there and a lot more.
No, I appreciate that. So, anybody who's listening, this is the guest, Cevin Soling. It's been an honor and pleasure. If you would like to hear more from the T.R.O.N podcast, please subscribe because we got a lot more we're going to dive into. And hopefully, we get a part two with Cevin because this is why this show was made to talk to people like him. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time, Cevin.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And yeah, where do you train?
I train. I'm just outside of Detroit, Michigan. So I train jujitsu at a place called Downriver Jiu-Jitsu. Professor Brent Insko. I do Muay Thai with training grounds named Josh Brzezinski. He's actually
Yeah,
had just. Huh?
I tried Muay Thai for a little bit. It was funny because I was like around that time I was like in the best shape I'd ever been, and I'd run the marathon. I'd go in and I've trained before and stuff at
It's
Go
exhausting.
Guru, and so I went to this Muay
Coach Ruth's
Thai,
good.
and I was like, oh shit,
Oh
the
yeah.
training before, the workout before, I
Yeah.
was like,
Oh my.
guy, I was like, I thought I was gonna like crush it because I was
Yeah.
in the training. I was like,
No,
oh
different.
my god,
It's
I
different.
can't believe how taxing this workout is before
Brutal.
the pre training workout, and it's just like,
Yep. Just doing like this, right? Hands up, right? And so, and then, I gotta give shout outs to my karate coach too,
uh,
Master Ken Moore. So, the fascinating part about coming from a karate background is you have some basis of what to do, but, you're getting kicked in the leg, they use elbows and things like that. And you use it in other arts, but the way that you position your body is just different, right? And you're like,
yeah.
yeah, man, this hurts.
I was thinking about the workout before. I was like,
It was
yeah,
awful. It's terrible. You think you're in shape, and you can't even, like, 5 minutes into it. You're just a spot on the floor, just a puddle on the floor, a complete puddle. It's awful. You have a lot of respect for those pro fighters, man. What they really put themselves through.
oh man,
So, but you are, yeah. This has been a lot of fun. So I hope we stay in touch.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.